Alright, so, Bacchanalian. This is an analysis of the second chapter of Tom O'Neill's book, Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the Sixties. This book. So Bacchanalian, before I get into it, is an adjective which is that of relating to or suggesting the ancient religious rites marked by orgiastic revelry and drunkenness that were held in honor of Bacchus, the god of wine. And that's the Merriam-Webster definition. Then my own accumulated definition is implying that of an out-of-control hedonism fueled by substance or an alcohol-soaked frenzy. So, into the actual article that I wrote. Quote, everyone over time assigned blamed for the crimes a little differently. I was dealing in memories that had survived decades of erosion. Even my most reliable sources were shaky on the details, unquote, wrote Tom O'Neill in the beginning of the second chapter of his book, Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the Sixties. With that, it would seem to heighten my initial and main query on the first chapter of the book, which retold the broad stroke of the helter-skelter narrative in subsequent trial, which came shortly thereafter, asking how truly reliable even first-hand testimony can be due to all these accumulating factors like dissociation, supposed hypnosis with hypothetical LSD-induced mind control, coercion, and orgasm-inducing slaughter. Altogether, I'm thus far reminded of one of the first podcast web radio series on the internet, Three Ring Radio, wherein on its 60th episode titled Process Church Facts and Fiction, the host Shane Bugbee, and the one-eyed bastard Doug Mesner, professionally known as Lucian Greaves, whose real name is Douglas Alexander Masico, investigate the convoluted history regarding the Process Church of the Final Judgement. And within that, their alleged ties to Charles Manson, from their visit to him in prison for an interview and subsequent article on death by Manson, and their official magazine's On Death issue, which can be found in this book here. So the woman on the phone with the two prior to interviewing one of the founding members, Timothy Wiley, questioned their own inquiry into the topic, remarking that it's all tantamount to ancient history, and that there will never be a complete story on any of the matters, echoing similar sentiment to Nikolas Schreck, another highly knowledgeable researcher into the Manson files. So with that, there is much that can be inferred and of mysterious note about the Process Church, both on its own and with possible deep ties to Charles Manson and the Tate-LaBianca murders, usually with some sort of link stemming from Charles Manson's brief delve into Scientology in association with the process itself coming out of Scientology as its own split-off, originally called Compulsions Analysis. Much of this mainly comes from the counterculture author and researcher Ed Sanders' work titled The Family, as well as other eloquently presented evidence from fellow skeptics of both narratives, delving into the inconsistencies of both in their official capacity with helter-skelter, as well as that propelled by the self-proclaimed deviant psychotherapy cult. Quote, their memories had warped to accommodate their bruised egos, their ulterior motives, and above all, their sense that they were at the center of any story worth telling. Unquote. O'Neill continued, if such is or was the case for these, as O'Neill called them, washed-up Hollywood personalities, who were in their dotage by the time he got around to speaking with them on the matter of the Tate-LaBianca slangs, then can the same as well be said of the perpetrators, both for their time in court and in the hindsight of later years to now. So based on the whole live freaky, die freaky fugue around the time, fueled by drugs and various kinds and degrees, how much does anyone have a wholly accurate portrayal of events? Quote, so many of the people I spoke to had strong ideas about why these murders happened, and yet none of them had spoken to the police, and many remained unwilling to go on the record with me, unquote. This can very much be called into question, as they spoke to Tom trying to uncover all this decades later, but not to any sort of law enforcement. And so, well, while on one hand, many were highly involved in narcotics, both in usage and distribution. These were as much the days when, even though the mantra of pigs being attributed to cops was at its height, it was widely thought then, more than now, that police are your friends, as well as the LA upper echelon being almost untouchable in that regards, as was then and even now too. O'Neill mentions prior to this a quote, conspiracy of silence in Hollywood, and unquote. And to that end, much of the time he was writing this, both Manson and Vincent Bugliosi had still been alive. So why speak to what would be an agent of the press at all? Nikolas Schreck characterizes similar, though with seemingly more detailed reasoning, be it, as he posits and O'Neill lightly mentions, the possibility of, through one of these sources in the chapter, a drug deal gone wrong, which also was not uncommon then or now, over the then new substance MDA. And going into the fact that Charles Manson was not an unknown face in these circles by any means, including those later murdered by the family members on Cielo Drive, and being so embedded as Schreck claims that even he starred in homemade pornographic films made by and for these members of elite American entertainment. So would much of this be saving face as well as bruised egos? And so with that, into the actual chapter. Chapter 2 of Tom O'Neill's book delves into the surrounding crowd of those murdered in Hollywood on August 8, 1969, touching quickly upon the constrained and in its own right convoluted marriage between Sharon Tate and director Roman Polanski via the reports of her friends who detailed what would seem to be a tumultuous affair at the very least. And if one is to go off that in association with his own admitted infidelity in the relationship paired with decades of public scandal afterwards, stemming even to this day in the form of allegations ranging in admitted action and credibility, could be seen as a set of rather plausible statements. And if one wants a good overview of that, Turkey Tom has an excellent video. Specifically noted in their marriage, however, and to go back to the last paragraph here, claims of filmed intimacy with the spouses, as well as alleged coerced threesomes recorded by Polanski. Those, however, are very much something which has never been proven and up to speculation, given none of these filmed sexual scenarios mentioned prior, or in this paragraph, have ever seen the light of day. Though O'Neill says of this that it was a result of Bugliosi after the murders and during the initial sweeps as DA, even though at the time Bugliosi was not in the position yet, raising more and other questions, to say the least, in that regard, and ordered them returned to where they had been taken from their respective shelves at 10080 Cielo Drive's residency. Jumping into this web of names presented, the chapter explores mainly how ingrained a living freakier Bacchanalian the entire echelon was, from widespread drug dealings and usage, as mentioned before, to hushed crimes around said substances, primarily cocaine and the then new MDA, and reporting on orgiastic affairs at and with the Cielo Drive party later killed, along with overlapping criminal underworld associations. You know, it's credible rapes and bisexual debauchery that's namely centering around one Billy Doyle, who was drugged at one of these affairs, flogged and assaulted by Wojtek Frykowski. Digging in from there more on the connections between these high-status individuals, such as Doyle and one Charlie Taka, to intelligence apparatuses, the latter of whom, in fact, was involved with the MIS, or Military Intelligence Services, which wasn't even actually revealed as real until 1972, during the Second World War. Apparently he fed information to one Hank Fine, who worked with the original OSS that evolved into the CIA until his own death. Only in passing does this chapter actually draw anything to the subject of Charles Manson beyond some overlap, much of it being tantamount to a friend of a friend of a friend in most of these connections rather than solid lines, with here and there allusion to his own interactions at these orgiastic events beyond that what is already known to be factual in the form of the Beach Boys producer and former Cielo Drive occupant Terry Melcher. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the second chapter of Chaos.